We're told reading is fundamental. So what happens to the millions of children struggling with words? For our cover story, Susan Spencer looks into the mysteries of dyslexia.
As an only child, Kathy Drennen gravitated toward grown-ups, especially smart ones.
I was kind of an intellectual, geeky kid. I'd go to a dinner party and there was a kids' table and an adults' table, and I was like, I'd rather sit at the adults' table because the conversation will be more interesting.
You were a nerdy little kid.
I was a nerdy little kid.
Come first grade, the nerdy kid landed in the highest reading group at school, only to realize she could not learn to read.
And they're like, okay, let's drop her down a little bit. Nope, how about down a little farther? And I don't know how many reading groups there are, but I was in the bottom.
Determined that her smart child not fail, Drennen's mother did research, found a specialist, and got the diagnosis: severe dyslexia.
For someone who is not dyslexic, is it like if I were to look at Arabic?
That's sort of how I felt, like I just couldn't make any sense of what I had in front of me.
How would you just simply define dyslexia?
Dyslexia is an unexpected difficulty in reading in an individual who has the intelligence to read at a much higher level.
Yale University doctors Sally and Bennett Shaywitz have been married for some 5 decades. In 1983, they began tracking the reading of more than 400 kindergartners, picked at random. They're still tracking them today.
And what we found was that 1 in 5 were dyslexic.
1 in 5?
1 in 5.
I would have thought maybe 1 in 20.
Well, that's what the dogma was. But now it's clear that it is very common.
But perhaps their most important finding, there is no link at all between dyslexia and intelligence.
The biggest misunderstanding is that people who read slowly aren't smart.
IQ is on the top and reading is on the bottom. And
the Shaywitzes compared typical readers whose reading skills mirror their IQs with dyslexic readers whose reading skills don't.
It's not just that it's low, it's that the gap gets wider as the years go
on. And they don't connect. One doesn't influence the other.
In the 19th century, doctors blamed bad eyesight, calling dyslexia word blindness. But today, medical scans clearly show it's in the brain.
In typical readers, certain areas in the left side of the brain are typically activated. In dyslexic readers, there's an inefficient functioning of those systems that we now know are for skilled reading.
In severe cases, that inefficient functioning can turn the printed page into a hodgepodge of indecipherable shapes.
If I want to translate this into television, what do we put on the screen for what was going through your mind?
Maybe Chinese characters for people who don't read Chinese characters.
If you're not dyslexic, it sounds crazy, doesn't it? Because our brains just do it automatically.
Laura Cassidy's daughter, Kate, failed reading in the 1st grade.
She couldn't learn the alphabet, not just writing it, but also saying it, but also reading it.
Like Kathy Drennen's mother, Cassidy, a retired surgeon, refused to accept failure and hired a private tutor. Today, at 17, Kate is doing better, though still coping with dyslexia.
Instead of just moving on after your daughter was situated, you went a different way. You saw a larger cause, and I'm just wondering why you did that.
Well, across the United States, there's a huge group of children that do not learn to read.
Modern, that's a good word.
So in 2013, Dr. Cassidy opened the Louisiana Key Academy.
Oh, good job. 2.
A public charter school in Baton Rouge just for dyslexic students.
My goal is to read. If you're dyslexic and your family doesn't have money, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't get what you need.
If I were to walk into a classroom here, what, if anything, would be different?
We start in the early years with teaching them how to pull the words apart, the decoding part.
Did anybody like reading before they came here?
No.
That was my worst nightmare.
Your worst nightmare was reading?
Today, 5th grader Emmy Youngs and these fellow students are excelling. Before coming to the academy, they struggled to make it to the 3rd grade.
In your other school, before you came here, when you were trying to read and you said you struggled with it, how did that make you feel?
It made me feel like a little bit dumb and stupid that I couldn't do much things as all the other kids.
5th grader Mackenzie Jupiter.
But you knew you weren't dumb and stupid, right?
Maybe.
So absent a school like this, what happens to these kids?
There's diminished high school graduation, diminished entry into college and college graduation, and we know that there's a number of people with dyslexia that are incarcerated.
A fact that led Dr. Cassidy to this Louisiana maximum security prison. And that led, just recently, to an astonishing finding.
Of the prisoners that we screened and tested, we found that over 50% had dyslexia.
Over 50%.
Over 50%.
So more than half.
More than half.
Her numbers are very similar to those of an earlier prison study in Texas.
If your self-esteem is battered and you're not really learning and you have an option to go on the streets, you go to the streets.
21-year-old Jonathan Wilson is one of the inmates in Dr. Cassidy's study. He has dyslexia, but until now, no one knew it.
What was it like when you were first learning to read, when you were a little kid?
It was real slow. It was real hard for me to understand the words.
Wilson, a first-time offender, is serving a 12-year sentence.
Did you finish high school?
No.
And what happened?
I got charged with armed robbery.
You got charged with armed robbery, and you got convicted of armed robbery.
Yes.
So here we are.
Yeah, so here we are.
What do you say to people who might say, you know, why should I care about dyslexia in prisons?
It's a life. Why wouldn't you want to help the life? And then if we want to reduce recidivism, you can do that if you identify them as dyslexic and give them the tools that they need.
A small first step, the prison reform bill passed last year with a big push from Laura Cassidy's husband, Bill Cassidy, who just happens to be a U.S. Senator from Louisiana. The law calls for dyslexia screening in prisons.
What would you like to do when you get out?
Clothes design. I would like to design things.
It may not be an impossible goal, despite dyslexia. Which brings us back to Kathy Drennen. She ended up teaching herself to read in the 6th grade, but not the way most of us do.
I recognize the shape of words, and I see the shape, and I say, oh, that's that word, and then I memorize what that word sounds like. So where did this equation come from?
She seems to have gotten good at it. Drennen is now a tenured professor of chemistry and biology at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
The way that I learned to view the world from learning to read, memorizing these shapes and looking at shapes and thinking of what is that shape, what is this language, what is this code, definitely makes me a better scientist. And I would come along and look at this and go, I recognize that shape.
Though encouraging, isolated success stories like Drennen's also remind Dr. Cassidy of the challenges ahead.
How are we as society doing in terms of dealing with this problem?
Terrible. We should be screening for dyslexia at the end of kindergarten.
Perhaps because you were with someone.
I mean, at this point in time, reading and writing are still necessary prerequisites to success in life.
Right, good. The teachers here help you decode words.
And you're better able to crack the code than you were before?
Ma'am.